The story begins a little bit before then because we've actually had the property since 1980. My grandparents and my dad and my uncle purchased the land in 1980, and at the time they were growing grapes for other wineries. It was a lot more fruit trees and grapes that weren't necessarily intended for making wine. There was places like Cadbury Schweppes, which was making Welch's grape juice at the time. They were located in St. Catharines. The growers in the area, if they weren't selling their cherries and plums and peaches to Del Monte Canning Factory, which was down the road, they were selling the grapes to Welch's for the Welch's grape juice. They did it for 9 years. And believe it or not, my grandfather, my grandmother, and my dad used to take care of all 40 acres of land, just the three of them. My grandmother would go up and down every single row, tying and pruning. My grandfather, my dad would go to work during the day, come back at night, tractor, spray, whatever else needed to be done. It was a labor of love, but it was purchased for making a living.
Welcome to Cool Life Podcast, brought to you by therealthingdating.com. www.therealthingdating.com.
Polydor Records for out scouting. This girl grabbed my bangs and ran my head right to the speaker.
Oh.
And everyone heard like this, yeah.
When we shot the scene in Good Will Hunting, I didn't know who most of these people were at the time. I mean, they weren't stars. It was Gus Van Sant that directed it. Gus Van Sant is on the floor with Matt Damon's character. I didn't even know who Matt Damon was at that time.
I'm Eva John. I'm a former candidate for local government. I was a children's television entertainer, and I love this world. And I believe we should take care of each other and have a lot of fun along the way. Welcome to Cool Life. Here we go. And welcome to Cool Life Podcast. I'm Eva John. Today I'm joined by Chris COLANERI of COLANERI Estate Winery in Niagara-on-the-Lake. Chris, welcome.
Welcome, Eva. Thank you very much for having me on the podcast. I appreciate it.
I'm so glad to have you here. And the fact is, I'm a customer. I visited your winery and I have just been so blown away with the beauty and just a lovely atmosphere. You can tell it's a family organization because the staff, everyone is very friendly and nice. There's just the most wonderful, welcoming feeling that stayed with me. And so I'm really proud.
That's really amazing to hear. I appreciate that. That's what we want everybody to feel. So the fact that you felt it, that's what we want and what we want to hear from coming into our backyard.
Right. Definitely mission accomplished.
Thank you.
I'm glad to have you here. As a matter of fact, can I ask you to please state your website for everyone?
Yeah, so it's COLANERYWINES.com, COLANERI wines.com.
Thank you. And we'll also put that up for the video portion for people to see. Now, Chris, can you tell me, when we drive into the entrance of COLANERI Estate Winery, we're seeing on either side of your driveway these beautiful vines that are growing. That's what greets us as we come in. Are those vines actually a part of the wine production that's done at your estate?
Yeah, so at our place it is. I know there are some wineries that they have their kind of show vineyard where you can peruse through and look at the grapes, touch the vines, all that sort of thing. But at our property, that's right where we get the grapes. So when you're driving in, on your left is Cabernet Franc, on your right is Riesling. And when you purchase the Riesling and the Cabernet Franc, they're coming right from there. So everything that you're driving through, walking through is all usable, and it's all stuff that we use.
That's amazing, because if you said, okay, no, it's for ambience, I could completely accept that. But it's just like, it's, just wonderful to see this lush set of vines on either side, and to know it's really a part of true production is really exciting. Now, Chris, can you tell me, how long has COLANERI Estate Winery been active at this location in Niagara-on-the-Lake?
Yeah, so in terms of the winery, we've only been around for about 13 years, actually 13 and a half at this point. The story kind of begins a little bit before then because we've actually had the property since 1980. So my grandparents and my dad and my uncle purchased the land in 1980, and at the time they were growing grapes for other wineries. Now, Niagara Lake is not as it was now back then. It was a lot more of fruit trees and grapes that weren't necessarily intended for making wine. There was places like Cadbury Schweppes, which was making Welch's grape juice at the time. They were located in St. Catharines. So a lot of the growers in the area, if they weren't selling their cherries and plums and peaches to Del Monte Canning Factory, which was down the road, they were selling the grapes to Welch's for the Welch's grape juice. So when they originally bought the property, they would sell some of the grapes to the wineries that were very few wineries that were in the area, but most of the production went to Cadbury Schweppes for the Welch's grape juice. So they did it for 9 years, and believe it or not, my grandfather, my grandmother, and my dad used to take care of all 40 acres of land, just the three of them. My grandmother would go up and down every single road, tying and pruning. My grandfather, my dad would go to work during the day, come back at night, tractor, spray, whatever else needed to be done. So it was a labor of love, but it was purchased for making a living. So they bought it for that purpose. Well, what ended up happening is Cadbury Schweppes moved a lot of their Welch's production to the States. And so all the growers in this area were kind of like, okay, so where do we sell these grapes now? It's not like we can ship them across the border. And the government gave certain growers money for pulling out these varieties. So they said, you know what, if you can't sell these grapes anymore, we want to give you an incentive to either switch or do something with it or give you some time with the property. So they gave the growers money. And at that time, my grandparents says, you know what, we're getting a little older. We can't do what we used to do. Why don't we take advantage and pull everything out? So in 89, we did nothing with the land. We pulled everything out. We did nothing with the land after that. We didn't put replant or anything along those lines. It laid vacant for 15 years. And nowadays, everyone thinks we're crazy because, oh my God, you left 15 years, you left it Niagara wine country, vacant land, right?
Right.
But again, you have to remember that Niagara Lake wasn't what it is now back then. So it laid vacant for 15 years. And when I say, oh, it was in our backyard, this legitimately is our backyard. So in the meantime, 3 houses got built on the property: my father, my uncle, and my grandparents.
Okay.
And my father and my uncle married 2 ladies who happened to be sisters. So 2 brothers ended up marrying 2 sisters.
Right.
And they built their houses all side by side with my grandparents. I couldn't sound more stereotypical Italian at this point. I realized that. But all 3 houses were built. And so this is legitimately our backyard. I grew up right on the property. I played baseball in the backyard. This was right where it was, but it was vacant at that time for those 15 years. Then finally, things kind of started happening in the Niagara region. More wineries started popping up, better development of grapevines and things along those lines. And all of a sudden around us, things start building up. And so we said, you know what, you got 40 acres of land sitting in the middle of Niagara wine country now. We got to do something with it or get rid of it. It's not useful just to lay it vacant. And so we said, you know what, let's continue the tradition and plant again. So in 2004 was when we started planting the grapes.
Right.
2008 was when we started the groundbreaking for the building, and then opened up in Labor Day weekend of 2010. So like I said, just about 13 and a half years at this point.
That's an amazing story of really the whole progression of the use of the land in over the decades. But there is something, for the little I understand about agriculture, but there is something good about leaving land fallow for a while, that it can be even more productive after, and maybe not necessarily always for 15 years, but did you find that after that time of not using the land for agriculture, was it even more bountiful as a result?
You know what, we actually get that question quite a bit. So a lot of people, think, oh, I don't know if I should ask that question, but it's a completely legitimate question. And you're absolutely correct, because a lot of times you'll have to, regenerate the soil, whether it's by natural fertilizers or artificial fertilizers when you're switching over plants or whatever. But for 15 years, laying it vacant actually worked in our favor, because when we started doing soil testing prior to planting, it was like, hey, we don't need these things. We don't need those things. We don't need this. And it was pretty much just grade the land and we're ready to rock and roll, because it's had that 15 years to regenerate the nutrients and lay fallow and really be better for what we wanted it to be for.
Well, that's a really harmonious way to work with nature, and to turn out that you've got land that's even more ready for production. That's amazing, and literally your backyard.
Yeah,
It's
I mean, I
beautiful.
don't recommend just hanging around with something for 15 years just for the sake of doing so,
Right.
but it just happened to work in our favor for that respect.
Of course, no, that's really great. Now, I wonder, are all of the processes of winemaking done right there at your estate, or does some of the bottling or fermenting occur elsewhere?
But we're a relatively small winery. We only do about 10,000 cases of wine a year. So
Only? Okay.
only, yeah, it sounds like a lot, but I'll
Yes.
give you perspective. So I would say the average winery in this area is hovering around the 40 to 50,000 case mark. Large wineries will be over 100,000 cases. So we're a small little. The big wineries, for example, some of the biggest companies in this area last year, they did about 4.5 million cases of wine. So
Wow.
we're but a fraction in the wine industry. So with respect to how much that sounds like, even it is a relatively small number. So because of that, we can do everything right on site. So everything that we do, all the grapes, even if we purchase grapes, they're all coming back on site. We're processing everything ourselves. Bottling everything ourselves, aging everything ourselves. Everything we do is right in our building so that we have control over it. And essentially, that's where you make your decision, where you say, okay, either I'm going to be a large winery or I'm going to be a small winery that has a little bit more small control and magnifying glasses on everything. And so everything we do, no matter, like I said, if the grapes are purchased, if they're not purchased, they're coming right into our place and we have control over every little bit of it.
That's wonderful to know that it's all in-house 100%. Now, Chris, Piazza Colaneri is a really impressive view when you come up and see this amazing edifice, which has been created to look like an absolutely lovely, quaint little village. And having experienced myself what it's like to sit at the piazza and to enjoy a nice charcuterie board and a flight of wine and enjoy the sunshine. Have you ever had this opportunity lately to, like the rest of us, sit and relax and enjoy your own piazza?
Yeah, that one's a tough one because during the day, no. It's when the piazza is rocking with the food, it's Saturday or Sunday, and we're usually going crazy at that point. It's very busy because the piazza is only open June until September, and the weekends in those months are our busiest weekends of the year. So I can't, in all good conscience, sit there and watch my staff going crazy. I get the itch, you know what I mean? I'm like, okay, I'll go clean that table for them, or I'll help that person, I'll go talk to that person. So it
Right.
wouldn't be, even if I did sit down, it wouldn't be a relaxing environment for myself because I know what's going on. Having said that, after we close, that's usually when we get the chance. So when things get a little more quiet, we close up 6:30, grab a bottle of wine, sit there. My father, my mother, and some of the staff will usually just sit down and decompress after quite a busy day, and that's when we get to enjoy. So sometimes that's usually in the light, but sometimes as the season goes on, it gets a little darker earlier. But we do get to enjoy it to a capacity, just not during the day. It's a little hard to do that for us.
So glad to hear that, though, because truly, if I had any free access to that piazza, I'd probably be having my breakfast, my lunch, my dinner, my midnight snack, everything
Yeah.
right there. It is really lovely. It's just truly, you walk there and right away you feel like 10 years younger. You are just relaxed. You can feel your blood pressure going down. So,
That was the idea, to be honest. Like when we were creating the feel, the ambiance, the vegetation that's there, the look of the building, everything we were envisioning was exactly what you just said, to make it feel like you're not in the hustle bustle of everyday life, to make it feel like you can actually just calm down, enjoy that glass of wine just a little bit differently, because that ambiance does have an effect on how you taste it and how you enjoy it, and even the company that you're with. You know, if you're not feeling like you're in Ontario or in the hustle bustle or really, you know, close to Toronto, which is not that far away,
right.
it allows you to actually relax and enjoy the wine. And I'm glad to hear that that's how you felt, because that's exactly how we wanted it to feel. And you look around at palm trees and all the cool flowers that my dad's fantastic at doing, and it just, like you said, calms you down and it makes you want to stay for a long time, which is crazy.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened with us. We just enjoyed ourselves immensely. Just the beautiful views, the lush gardens that you have there for people to enjoy in the piazza. it's just the perfect combination and really well thought out for sure.
Right on. That's good to hear. Yeah. And I can give all the credit to my father too, where he has the green thumb and he puts all those lovely palm trees and all those tropical flowers and things out there, which we have to bring all in the winter. Everybody comments about, oh, how do you have these palm trees here? And so it's kudos to him on that as well, to make the ambiance even better.
Well done. Chris, can you tell me, how was the decision made to include donkeys at your beautiful estate?
Yeah, a lot of people see that and they're like, how the heck did that connection even come about, right? And I always say, no matter what you're doing, no matter what situation you're given, there's good and bad that comes from it. Maybe there's only a small amount of good and a lot of bad, or a lot of good and a small amount of bad. But at the end of the day, there's a little bit of both in no matter what the situation. So when COVID came around, that's exactly kind of what happened. COVID was obviously a very bad thing for a lot of reasons. But there was some interesting things that came out of it. And the interesting things were a lot of creativity and a lot of new experiences and a lot of new ways of running things. Right. So I received an email from a lady who said, hey, I've got these 2 mini Mediterranean donkeys. I'm looking to build out a program. And at that time I says, Dad, you won't believe the email I just received. She's got these mini Mediterranean donkeys and I'm not sure how to take this email. And he turns around and he says, you know what, Christopher, it's kind of funny you said that, because my last memory before coming to Canada from immigrating from Italy was loading grapes into the pack saddles of a donkey and the donkey taking it up the slope of the vineyard.
Right.
And I looked and I said, okay, perfect. I have a connection, right? Or else at this point, I'm like, what am I going to do with donkeys and wine, right? So I said, you know what, it would be cool to incorporate this because it is part of our tradition. It is part of where we came from. So that was kind of the catalyst, and we built the program around that to say, okay, how can we do this? So we said, you know what, let's do a whole vineyard tour with the donkeys, not to load grapes in, because again, that's not what we're doing these days, but it's more of a homage to our tradition and who we are and how we came to where we are. So basically we did a whole tour, walk through the vineyard with the donkeys, like people get to walk them. And that was kind of the whole premise of how we started it in the first year, because people couldn't travel or anything. People loved it because it was like being transported to Italy or being transported to Europe and having that cool experience. And these 2 donkeys, whose names are Phyllis and Earl, are the sweetest things in the world. They are the most cuddly things you'll ever see. And you didn't realize how much you wanted to cuddle with a donkey until you actually cuddle with these 2 donkeys. They're incredible.
Well, you certainly know how to get to our hearts, and you have them wearing their flowers and they're so well behaved. And, you know, it is something that is really a touch of the authenticity of the European and specifically the Italian experience. There's certain areas, maybe one day I'll make it to Positano, but no, because it's a hillside community, that when heavy items and deliveries are being made on a daily basis, you cannot just drive a truck through all of those little winding streets and little pathways. And they do have donkeys hired in for most companies to do their deliveries. They're strong and sure-footed, and it is a part of the culture of the area for hundreds of years. And it's amazing that you've brought that touch of Italian culture to your wine community. That's beautiful.
Yeah, you know what? It's not only is it nice to see people enjoying them too, because of all the heritage and everything, but the stories that come out of it too. Like because we've started this experience, you get a lot of people saying, "Oh, I got to bring my dad because he used to have a donkey," or "I got to bring this person because they lived in Italy." And so then you hear these experiences and these stories that come from it, and that's so rewarding to hear those too. And it's such a unique thing that it really brings back memories, and it really allows people to enjoy the experience of the wine as well a little bit more. But I can't speak to the importance of those 2 little ones. My mother would like to kidnap them. So if I didn't bring them back, I think she'd have words with me. But it's amazing to see how people react to them. They steal your heart.
Right. Well, it's something that is part of the special charm of your winery. And right now we're going to take a break and talk about our sponsors and supporters, and we'll be back with more winery talk on Cool Life Podcast.
Those lonely days of lockdowns and isolation are gone for good. Go to www.therealthingdating.com. That's www.therealthingdating.com. It's time to share. Share your time, share your life, share your love. www.therealthingdating.com. Join for free. Upgrade at any time, starting at just $5.99 a month. www.therealthingdating.com. Because it's time. You're listening to the Cool Life Podcast. We'll be back in 3, 2, 1.
And we are back on Cool Life Podcast. I'm Eva John, and continue our conversation with Chris Culinary of Culinary Estate Winery. Chris, I want to know, because there is the unique industry of winemaking here in Canada, is there a difference in the way that wine is made in Canada and the Niagara region as compared to how wine is made in European countries like Spain or France?
Yeah, absolutely. There's huge differences. I mean, at the heart of it, it's still you're fermenting grape juice to make wine. That's the pure basics of it. And that a lot of times isn't going to change. But what happens is the locations, the methods, the climate, there's so many factors. So things change to adapt to those factors. And you wouldn't even have to go, say, Europe versus here. You say Niagara region versus outside of the Niagara region, or even Niagara-on-the-Lake versus Beamsville, which is 20 minutes down the road, or where the winery is located based closer to the lake versus where we are. So you don't have to go even that far to have to change what things happen. We're dealing with different things. We're dealing with much more worse winters than a lot of those places.
Right.
We're dealing with totally different climate patterns and changes, and Niagara is a little bit frustrating in that way because no 2 years are the same. We're dealing with completely new and innovative ways of trying to adapt these grapevines and adapt winemaking techniques, because what you do there is not necessarily what you can do here, just based on acidity and types of grapes that they're growing and climate and days of growing season. There's so many different things you have to kind of tweak. The best example I usually give, because a lot of people know California wines. So California, they're dealing with so much heat that your acidity is a lot lower and your alcohol is higher because you're dealing with a lot more sugar. Where here, we're kind of the opposite problem, where we have the acidity, we don't have as much sugar. And so we're having to change how we grow and what we do. They're picking at night because they're dealing with so much sun and they want the sugars to be a little lower, where we're picking into December sometimes because we can't get the sugars up. So there's so many things that change just based on where the location of the grapes that are being grown and what you can grow. Like there's some varieties that you can grow in Europe that you can't grow here, just based on what kind of growing conditions they enjoy. So yeah, for sure, you have to change things based on where your location is, and it's not just halfway across the world. It's within minutes of some regions.
Right. Now, everyone is familiar with the image of the big wooden oak barrels. Are those oak barrels still used in wine production?
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely a thing that gets used depending on the winery that it happens to be in. The bigger barrels are less popular just because they're very expensive and they're beautiful. I would love to have a wall of those, but they're quite expensive. Harder to clean as well, where the metal tanks are a lot easier to clean, a lot easier to control. Temperature-wise, they're a lot easier to control as well. But the smaller barrels definitely still get used all the time. Your standard 225 liter barrels that you're used to seeing, no matter if you see a wine barrel, that's your typical image of a wine barrel.
Right.
Those still get used like crazy. In fact, all of our wines, other than one wine, our Riesling is the only one that does not go into barrel. So we still use those. The biggest one we have is about 1,000 liters, which is about 4 times the size. But you get some large ones that are absolutely spectacular, but they're usually bigger wineries, have a little bit better of a budget because they are quite costly to have, but they're beautiful.
Okay, so for a peek behind the curtain, what does it cost? And I realize, I hope, we're talking about wholesale prices and you've got
Right.
a bulk supplier. Now, if you were to get a little barrel or, whatever, a skid of them or something, like, what does a little barrel cost a winery?
Yeah, so this is where we start getting heart palpitations because this is not a cheap area of the winery. So depending on the kind of barrel that you use, an average American oak barrel is hovering in and around the $500 range per
Okay,
barrel, empty, nothing in it, just the barrel. The average French oak barrel is about €1,000, so you're roughly about $1,300
right.
per barrel.
Okay.
So you start to add those things up because it only holds about 25 cases of wine. So it gets a little costly, and that's your standard 225-liter barrel, let alone the 500, 1,000, or much larger than that. So you can imagine how much it escalates as you go larger in the barrel size.
Right. Well, now, as a comparison, because of now, technology and the advancements in the science of winemaking, is there a significant difference in the flavor that you get from a wine that's aged in an oak barrel compared to the wine that's aged in the new style metal tanks?
Yes, for sure. The one that people would know the biggest difference in would be Chardonnay, because you very often see unoaked Chardonnays and oak Chardonnays.
Yes.
And there's a very big difference between those two types of wines. Your unoaked Chardonnay is usually a lot more fresh, bright, little better pop of acidity on it, a little bit more fruit character to it, where the oak Chardonnays are much fuller body, much fuller flavored, much creamier, much softer on the palate, a little bit more of that butterscotch and caramel feel that comes from it rather than the fresh, bright fruit that you get from the unoaked. So it really can change a wine drastically. The reds, it softens them quite a bit. Aging them in barrel just gives it that nice creamier texture, that nice softer feel. It integrates them more versus in the tank, it would be a lot more your fresh fruit, a lot more your bright kind of cherries and very, very bright and fruity kind of feel. That's the only kind of way I can describe it. Whereas in a barrel, it's softer. You get your tannin structure. You get a longer finish. You get a more integrated feel. It's totally different. It's kind of like grapefruit juice and and wine. It's kind of a comparison in that way, where you get the bright fruit and then you get the more integrated and softer feel on the back end. So definitely it has a huge difference aging it in the barrel and not. The other thing is timing. How long was it in that barrel for?
Right.
That will have an effect on it as well. You say, oh, age it in a barrel versus tank. Well, if it's only 2 months in the barrel, it's not going to have as much of effect as if it's 2 years in the barrel per se. So there's definitely a lot that can happen and a lot that can change in that time.
Wow. That's a very interesting view on how the science and technology it's offering you a good option, but it's also giving you different qualities. Now, you used an expression in there, and just to reel us back a little bit for those who are not wine aficionados, as you may be. So you said a longer finish. Now, as far as someone experiencing that in flavor and tasting, what are they experiencing when you're saying a longer finish?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you know what? I apologize because sometimes you use verbiage that you think, because you use it all the time, that everybody knows, and you have to think like it's not like everybody knows these things. It's wine words that we always use on a daily basis, right? It's like a different language, right?
My cornflakes have a longer finish.
Yeah, exactly, right? Exactly. So it's essentially the finish. A lot of people would refer to it as the aftertaste. The finish is basically once the wine goes down, once you've swallowed the wine, the flavor that you're left with. So a lot of times it'll be referred to as a pleasant or an unpleasant finish, meaning does it leave you with that kind of bitter, weird feel on the back end, or is it beautiful flavors that you're left with? That is one way. And then the length of the finish. So is it a short finish or is it a long finish? One of my biggest pet peeves is a short finish. Is when you take that sip of wine, it goes down and you're left with nothing. Long finishes are just such beautiful things because it lingers. It keeps that flavor on your palate for a lot longer. That's usually the reason you know it's a better quality wine is because that finish is longer and nicer. So the finish is basically how much longer am I tasting that wine, and is it still lingering, and then do I enjoy that lingering flavor on the palate?
Thank you for that translation. Now, we've all seen the movies where grapes are crushed in your bare feet, and it's a big party, and everyone's holding up their skirts and rolling up the ends of their pants. Now, are the days of dancing on the grapes gone?
Yeah, the days of I Love Lucy have kind of have gone by the wayside a little bit.
The best.
The best, right? No, to be honest, in terms of the formal production of things, for the most part, unless you're doing something extremely small batch, for the most part, it's gone by the wayside. However, it's not lost, and the reason I say that is because sometimes we'll have events where that does take place. We had an event we did for our wine club members where we called it Divine and Dine, and they came out and picked a row of grapes for us. And then afterwards, not with the grapes they picked, mind you, but we had different grapes that they had a little grape stomping competition. So they had paired up in two people. One person went in, and the other person's collecting all the juice that they're stomping out, and it's a good workout. I'll tell you, it's. But at this point, we've gone away from the formal production of stomping the grapes. We do it a little different method, but anytime we can do an event where we have that in there, it is so much fun, and people love it.
Now, in the bottom line, does Health Canada let wines get bottled after they've been stomped by foot, or is that just like, no, it's not done?
You know what? To be honest, it's it's a different kind of category because you're dealing in such high alcohol contents that anything that gets formed is really killed by that alcohol, right? So it's a little bit different, but at the same time, I hope people aren't going in with bare feet in that respect. So if it does get crushed by foot, it's with boots rather than with bare feet.
Oh, what's the fun in that?
I know, right? You got to feel it in between your toes, right?
Right.
That's the most important thing. But I kind of hope people aren't doing that because that's a little interesting of a method, to be honest.
It's a little bit ancient, but I'm sure, I mean, that's I think maybe some of the magic of the experience, that you're participating in something, it's memorable, you get purple feet.
People still talk about it. When we did that event, people are still like, I'll never forget when we came and we picked those grapes and we stomped the grapes after. It was so much fun, and it was so ridiculous. And it happened to be pouring rain that day too. So it was like, oh my gosh, what a mess.
Wow. Oh my goodness. Something memorable. I'll have to look into that.
Yeah, very much so.
Now, Chris, for the production of wine, is there an effect where, based on the location of the region where the grapes are grown, does that affect the bouquet and flavor of the wine based on where the grape was grown?
Absolutely. Yeah, it has a huge effect. If you picked us up, you put us into Beamsville or closer to the lake or somewhere different, our wines would taste entirely different. It has a lot to do with soil, location, growing days. There's so many factors that are involved. So yeah, absolutely, it would change. Just St. David's itself, which is where we are. It's Niagara-on-the-Lake that we're located in, but St. David's is kind of the sub-appellation that we're in. We have a longer growing season by a few days than some of the other areas of Niagara-on-the-Lake, just because we're a little further out from the lake. We have our own little microclimate that's here based on the Niagara escarpment that we have interacting with the lake itself. The soil is entirely different. Just from 5 minutes down the road to where we are, we have a really heavy, rich clay soil versus the plains of Niagara-on-the-Lake, which is a lot more sandy loam. So in our situation, you get a lot more earthiness, you get a lot more depth, you get a lot more earthiness, a lot more of the black cherry characteristics coming out. Where you see the biggest difference, if you're talking Niagara, is if you go out to Beamsville, which, like I said, was about 20 minutes north of or west of us. They're on a lot more of a limestone soil. So what you end up getting is a lot more of the minerality, a lot more metallic feel, a lot more of the graphite feel to their wines. So it's a totally different experience just based on the fact that they're located in a different area. Because they're a little higher on the escarpment, they get a little bit more of that limestone character. So absolutely. And that's why I referred to earlier was saying, when you asked about Spain and Italy, you just move 5 seconds down the road and you have a completely different feel. There used to be a winery way back that had two different types of soils on their property, and they would release two totally different wines from those two soils. Everything else the same except those two soils. And it would taste completely different. So you don't have to go very far to have differences in the wine just based on that.
Interesting. That's amazing, especially at such close proximities that this will affect the chemistry of wine.
Very much so. And it's interesting blending too, because now you could have two separate wines that you make if you're pulling it from different areas, and then you start blending them to get different flavors and different complexities within your wine. You can create complexity that way too.
Beautiful aspect of winemaking. I'm interested to hear more. Right now, we're going to take a break to talk about our sponsors and supporters, and we'll be back with more winemaking discussion with Chris Culinary of Culinary Estate Winery on Cool Life Podcast.
Those lonely days of lockdowns and isolation are gone for good. Go to www.therealthingdating.com. That's www.therealthingdating.com. It's time to share. Share your time, share your life, share your love. www.therealthingdating.com. Join for free. Upgrade at any time, starting at just $5.99 a month. www.therealthingdating.com. Because it's time. This is Cool Life Podcast. Please remember to subscribe to Cool Life on your streaming service and on YouTube as Hellenique Today. That's HELENIQUE Today. Because that helps us to bring more cool stuff to your ears. You're listening to the Cool Life Podcast. We'll be right back.
And we are back on Cool Life Podcast. I'm Eva John, and we're continuing our conversation with Chris Culinary of Culinary Estate Winery. Chris, I want to know, like on your website, I've seen, and also from visiting your winery, I've seen that you do have different types of wine experiences available for your guests. Can you tell me about what your guests encounter when they sign up for a wine experience with you?
Yeah, absolutely. It's an interesting question nowadays because it has changed drastically. When we were dealing with the pandemic, things were very different before that versus how they are now. And so the experiences that we offer now are a lot more personalized, to be honest. It's not as much of a come to the bar and be shoulder to shoulder with 35 other people. It's a lot more personalized. So what we do nowadays, we do still offer tastings, but our tastings are a little bit more one-on-one. They're seated tastings with our staff. They're not serving any other guests. They're just serving your group for 45 minutes, and they get to pick 4 wines that they'd like to try. We tell them all about it, the stories of the labels that they're tasting, and how we make the wines. Beautiful tasting experience. It's not so much a here's your wine and that's it. We're very much a personal experience, because again, you're coming to our backyard. We want it to feel how you felt, like you were saying earlier. So that's how we've done our tastings. We have group tastings that we can do downstairs in the production area, so you'd be right beside the tanks as well. And then I've started doing, last year was our first year doing this. We're bringing them back again this year. We're starting to do seminars. So we have wine seminars where we can actually get in depth into certain topics. Like, for example, we did a vertical vintages, which we called and investigated the aging of wine and how wine gets aged and what happens during wine aging. Where normally you can just kind of briefly touch on those in those 45-minute tastings. This, we get into a whole 2-hour seminar on tasting old wines and how we age them and what happens and how the flavor profile changes. So we started offering a little bit more in-depth things. Then, of course, as you know, in the summer, we have our piazza that's opened, and when you can sit outside at any time on Saturdays and Sundays, that we can enjoy a flight, a glass, just sit there, relax, have a little bit of pizza if they wanted. But again, that's more of a casual experience where you can just sit back and enjoy and relax. And then, of course, we have our two little donkeys that come on Saturdays and Sundays as well. And so that experience is also a little bit more in depth about the vineyard, but a full walkthrough of the vineyard, walking the donkeys, petting the donkeys, having a flight of wine. So it's a little bit of a different thing for everybody. We have something different that kind of everybody can enjoy. If you want something casual, we have something like that. If you want something a little more structured, we have that. And if you want something a little out of the box, we've got that as well. So a little bit of everything, but we're still looking to do more and build more. So this year we have some events and more ideas that we're coming up with that hopefully we can continue to offer more and more experiences to people.
It's really a beautiful place to have these diverse opportunities to experience wine and the depth of the culture behind wine. Now, I'm wondering if you can tell me just a little bit more about how your guests get to interact with the donkeys. You were mentioning that before, just a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. So again, the experience is a lot about the donkeys. We have a vineyard tour as a part of it, but a lot of times, if I'm there, no one's paying attention to me because they've got these two little donkeys that are stealing their hearts, right? So for the most part, it is a walk around our vineyard where we tell them about how we grow the grapes, what time of the year it is, so what we're doing at that point, what things are harvested and what times, the challenges, because that's a big thing with the vineyard, is what challenges we encounter. All while little by little we're walking through the vineyard and they get a chance to walk the donkeys themselves. So they walk alongside you. You get a lot of chance to cuddle them. We do a little photo shoot at one point around the back of the winery where it's kind of like an aisleway down the back, and they get to do a little photo shoot with the donkeys. They turn around, they look at them. Beautiful. We start off with a glass of sparkling, and then we end with a flight of 3 wines as well. The donkeys will then come back over, and it's kind of cute because Earl likes to rest his head on the picnic tables where people are. He's almost exactly the right height. He just puts his head right up on the thing, and everyone says bye to the donkeys, and it's a whole about hour and 15, hour and a half, depending on if I'm running the experience or not. If I'm running it, it's closer to the hour and a half, but usually about an hour and a 15-minute experience, and you get lots of time with those two little ones.
That sounds like a really nice way to experience winery and have the beautiful innocence of your donkeys as companions for that.
Absolutely.
Now, I have said a few times, I'll probably keep saying how beautiful the main building is at the Piazza, Culinary Piazza. And I've had a couple of people say to me that this beautiful picturesque scenery would be perfect for a wedding, but they can't arrange it. Can you tell me why is it that you have such a beautiful place, but that the Culinary Estate Winery doesn't book weddings at this point? Why?
Yeah, good question. Because
Why?
it's a lot of people say that. It's like, why? I just want to have it here. To be honest, it's strictly a lifestyle thing. So many people are like, oh, you can make lots of money, this, that, and the other. To be honest, it has nothing to do with that. It's the fact that it is our backyard, and I know my father's here constantly. My parents are always here, and it's more of a when we close, that's our time to decompress. And if you have a lot of weddings, it's in our backyard, and something's always going on in the backyard, and someone's always there. And I know my father is always going to want to be there to oversee things, right? And I'm the same way. We would always want to be there, making sure everything is going well, and everything's just like I said to you about the piazza, where Saturday, Sunday, if I'm sitting there, I would be like, okay, well, I need to do this, I need to do that, I need to go talk to that person, and it would be no different. So it's a little bit of that. Secondary is, where do people want to take pictures when they want to do their weddings? Is in the front of the winery on a Saturday at 3:00 in the afternoon, which would hinder your experience being on the piazza, right? So it's a tough kind of avenue to say, okay, yeah, let's do it. And people would want to take pictures in certain areas, and we've just kind of said, you know what, for now we're just gonna stay away from it, and we'll see in the future if that's the road we want to go. But at this point, we've said no weddings at the point.
Okay, well, I certainly understand with your explanation and I will allow it.
No, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that.
No, I get it. I'll say, it is a beautiful place. It's something that comes to mind right away when you see how lovely it is.
Thank you.
Oh, no, no, thank you, because of the way you've brought something so special and so personal to the guests who visit. Now, I do want to ask you something about your donkeys again, because of course, when I went to visit, I guess my timing, something about the donkeys not being available. Can you tell me, are there certain times of year and times of day that the donkeys are and are not available? Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, for sure. So we were doing it last year on a little bit more of a schedule. So they would have tours at certain times and they would be on tours at certain times. And it was only Saturdays and Sundays. So depending on the time of the year, Sundays stopped at the beginning of September. So we were only doing Saturdays from September to Thanksgiving. So it was just Saturday, Sundays that we get to see them. I says, I want that work schedule where they only come to work 2 days of the week and then they get 5 days off. How do I get that schedule, right? And when they do come to work, they get fed, cuddled, and pet. Like it's crazy.
Good life.
It's a great life, right? But so it's just those times where we say, okay, there's 3 or 4 times during the day where the tours will start. Those are all on our website where they can be booked. But it is definitely limited to those couple of days. We'd love to have them here all the time, but it is just those couple of days we limit them to.
Good to know. I can plan a little better next time.
Yeah.
Now, we have been having this conversation with you. I'm just going to say, now you have a beautiful background showing, and this is what we've been talking about. We're seeing the driveway up towards the Culinary Estate Winery and that beautiful dusk and the building lit so beautifully and showing the piazza. And it's been dreamy for me to be able to see that in your background right now. And it conjures a lot of happy memories. And with that, right now, we're going to end part 1 of our conversation, but we'll be back with part 2. Please keep an eye on the schedule for Cool Life Podcast. Before we rock on out of here, can I ask you, Chris, please, once again, to tell us your website?
Absolutely. It's culinarywines.com, COLANERI wines.com.
Thank you so much. Until
you.
next time, I'm Eva John at Cool Life Podcast. Bye.
And that was our show. Thank you for listening to the very end. Please remember to subscribe through your streaming service to get more access to our guest interviews. Also, please subscribe on YouTube to help support our podcast. Until next time, I'm Eva John for Cool Life Podcast. Thank you for turning me on.